Hey, my name is Darryl Rouse, rhymes with house, and how would you like to have all the knowledge that an experienced real estate agent has that maybe has been 5, 10, 20, or like me, 30 plus years in the business? How would you like to have some of that knowledge in your very first day, in your very first week, in your first month, in your first year, just by asking? Well, there's a way to do it, and there's a system, and we're going to talk about that today. Number one, in the office I was first in, again, this is 34 years ago, it was mandatory for a brand new agent from day one in that office to take a more experienced agent to lunch every day and ask that agent a series of questions. It was mandatory. You weren't allowed not to do it. Now, that brought up a couple of issues for me. Number one, I virtually had no money, so we had to go to a all-you-can-eat buffet. In those days, I think it was $2.50. This is in Long Beach, California, a place called Sir George's. Not that that's relevant, but what's relevant is I did what I had to do to get knowledge. So in our office, it was mandatory again. Every single lunchtime, if you were in the office, you had to take a more experienced agent to lunch. And what was a more experienced agent at that point? Someone that had been in the business more than one day, which was literally everyone in the office. Number two, have a list of 3 questions you can ask this agent that you're taking to lunch. Now, yeah, you don't have to take them to lunch if you really can't afford it, but pull them aside where you can talk quietly to them. But have 3 questions you can ask. Don't have a list of 20 questions. It gets too much and you won't really be paying attention by the 20th question, or they'll lose interest. Have 3 good questions you can ask. And here's the other part of this. Once you've been through and asked all the agents in your office, especially if you're with a small office, don't be afraid to ask one of your competition. When you come in contact with another real estate agent from another office, don't be afraid to say, hey, my name's Darryl, I'm brand new in the business. Can I ask you just 1 or 2 questions about the real estate industry and what may help me in my first year? Let me tell you right now, no matter how much competition that agent may be in with you, or you think they're in competition with you, they will impart that knowledge to you. I know when I got to the point in my career where I had a lot of knowledge and an agent would come to me and ask me questions, that made me feel extremely good, and I never, ever, ever said no. Even if they were what I would consider competition, and that happens sometimes, I would still give them that knowledge, because that's just how the universe works. And by giving like that, it comes back to you tenfold. Then maybe when you have to do a transaction with them down the line, you have that relationship built up. Number 3, listen, and listen attentively. That means listen with intent. Don't just sit there and hear them, listen to them. What I used to do is I always had a notepad and a pen, and I would write down what they said, because it was important to me. And I didn't play this game called yes, but. So in other words, if they said something in my head, I immediately go, ooh, that will definitely not work. I didn't go, yeah, well, that's great, but for me, that won't work. That's yes, but. Yeah, I agree with you, but. And but negates what you just said. So which means you don't agree and. So don't play yes, but. Listen, don't judge what they say, write it down, go away, and then think about it, put some effort into it and say, okay, can that work for me? Or how can I make that work for me? Because remember, they have more knowledge than you at the end of the day. That's it. And you have to understand that. And if they're telling you some tips on what they did in their first year or didn't do, you need to listen to that. You need to pay attention and be attentive. Number 4, what questions do I ask? Okay, if you haven't kind of figured that out by now, I'll give you some examples. What was the biggest mistake you made in your first month? What do you wish you'd done differently in your first year? What was your biggest mistake in that first month in the business? What do you wish you'd done differently in that first year? What advice could you give me that would really pay off in my second year in the business? If you could go back and start all over again, what would you do differently in that first couple of months? With a limited budget, how do I market myself and how do I generate business? Oh, and by the way, by limit, I mean you've got no money. So there some of the questions. Now don't forget, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of questions. And when I asked agents these questions, sometimes the same question, I got completely different answers, especially if you go back to that first month in the business, what would you have done differently? And the answers are really interesting depending upon where that agent is now in their business. Yeah, and for what would you have done differently? I heard simple things like, well, I would have had a business plan from day one. I would have had very specific goals from day one. I would have had a better mindset from day one. I would have gone to seminars, not so much on the technicalities of selling real estate, but how to mentally get in that right frame of mind to be positive in this industry when it beats you up so much. So there were all sorts of questions and all sorts of answers. But at the end of the day, what I did is I gathered this knowledge. I was a sponge. If you're not a sponge in that first year, you might succeed accidentally, but there'll be some part of the process that's out of balance down the line. So that's the idea of this. It's things and questions to ask and tips to gather so that first week, that first month, that first year in the business is a little bit easier. And they're things you take on your second, third, fourth, fifth year. I mean, things I learned or that I had tips for in my first year, I eventually could implement. And I still do some of those things today, like read my goals daily. I've been in business 34 years. I still look at my goals and go, okay, what's my focus today? Tony Robbins said just recently in a seminar we just did for all the COVID stuff we're going through right now. He said, where your focus goes, your energy flows. I wish I'd known that in my first year, because my focus was, oh my God, this business is so hard. Buyers are liars. Sellers eat their young. Other agents treat me like crap. That's where my focus was. No wonder I only sold one house in my first year. But when I changed my focus and changed that self-talk to myself, obviously, everything started to change in that second year. Going up to selling 50 houses and then 100 houses, and going from making, if I average out that first year, I don't know, $500 a month to making $100,000 a month. I didn't work any harder to make $100,000 a month. I just worked differently and I worked smarter, but I had the correct mindset in place. So that's it. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell if you want to be reminded for the next video, and that's it for now. Go out and sell.